Was the year 1990.
Dick Tracy. Warren Beatty is Dick Tracy. Dick Tracy is a 1990 semi-noir crime action film directed and produced by Beatty himself. The film is based on the 1930s comic strip created by cartoonist Chester Gould. The film sees Detective Dick Tracy take on big-time crime boss Alfonso Big Boy Caprice, played brilliantly by screen legend Al Pacino. Tracy has to protect a young street urchin known as Kid, whom has witnessed a mass execution of mobsters on the orders of Big Boy. Tracy is assisted with helping Kid by his girl Tess Trueheart, played by actress Glenn Headley. On top of dealing with Big Boy and his gang and protecting Kid, Tracy also has to deal with romantic tensions involving both his girl Tess and the villainous nightclub singer Breathless Mahoney, played by legendary pop star Madonna in one of her earlier movie roles. The movie was a massive success, grossing over $162 million worldwide on a $46 million budget. It was the third highest opening weekend film of 1990. Big-time critic sites like Rotten Tomatoes, Metacritic, and CinemaScore gave the film favourable reviews. The film also won an impressive 3 Academy Awards after being nominated for 7, tying Black Panther for most Academy Awards won by a comic book film. So many fascinating tidbits about this movie, of which I will mention a few. Robert De Niro had been considered for the role of Big Boy before that went to Pacino. Madonna won the role of Breathless Mahoney, but there were several higher profile names considered for the role, including Michelle Pfeiffer, Kathleen Turner, Kim Basinger, and Sharon Stone. Dick Tracy has a big cult following and is widely recognized for its bold visual style, emulating the color palette and aesthetic from the comics. With favorable comparisons to James Bond, it is a classic comic gangster flick representing 1930s comic galore brought onto the big screen for the 90s. Hard to Kill. One of the biggest action stars of the 90s, Steven Seagal stars as a vigilante in this action flick. He plays Detective Mason Storm, who is a detective that is shot by a hit squad involving corrupt cops, and he ends up in a coma during a home invasion that also takes out his wife. After 7 years, he reawakens and sets off on a one-man mission journey to avenge the death of his wife, and expose the corruption of the man responsible for the hit, Senator Vernon Trent. The corrupt cops are aware of Trent's re-emergence, and they set out to finish the job and take out any nurses that Mason may have talked to after waking up from his coma. In a final showdown, Mason takes on Trent's men one by one, until Trent is the last man standing. And after holding him up at gunpoint, Trent is arrested after police discover footage which proved Mason was set up, and ultimately he avenges the death of his wife. This was, by 90s standards, your typical action revenge flick involving a one-man army. Seagal would be known for this style of movies, and he would go on to star in several other flicks throughout the 90s. By all means, this was not his best outing, but a decent flick involving high-octane action. House Party. 80s/90s hip-hop duo Kid and Play were riding high in the charts with their free-flowing fun style of hip-hop. They took their talents to the big screen to star in this fun comedy movie. Play is set to have a massive party at his house with his parents out of town, and Kid faces a few obstacles on his way to the party in the form of local school bullies Stab, Pee-wee and Zilla after getting into a fight with them in school. His father Pops is told of this and grounds Kid as a result. Determined to get to the party, Kid sneaks out, but he has to deal with a pair of racist cops and the bullies. Kid eventually makes it to the party, and all-out fun ensues with incredible dancing and outrageous raps, including a Kid vs. Play diss track. Kid gets caught up in a love triangle between the local girls Sydney and Shrey, and eventually he ends up with Sydney. He also needs to get back home and deal with more shenanigans from the bullies and then the cops again, and subsequently he ends up in jail, but through his friends he's able to make bail before making it back home. And into the leather belt of Pops, who gives him a nice welcome home gift to remember. Met with high praise and critical acclaim, most critics were high on this movie, with Rotten Tomatoes giving a 94% approval rating and describing a light, entertaining teen comedy with an infectious energy. The movie was jam-packed full of big stars including AJ Johnson, Tisha Campbell, John Witherspoon, late comedian Robin Harris, and future bad boy Martin Lawrence. A movie with a massive cultural impact, especially in the black community, and is seen to this day as a cult 90s classic, and without a doubt, the best of the House Party franchise. Another 48 Hours. Eddie Murphy and Nick Nolte return in the sequel to 1982's 48 Hours, a buddy cop movie with the cop Jack Cates needing the help of newly released convict Reggie Hammond to clear his name from a charge of manslaughter. Boss Reggie has his own problems as he is the target of a bike gang hired by a mastermind known as Iceman, while a rogue member of the gang is out to kill Jack for the death of his brother after the events of the first movie. Another 48 Hours is packed with cars, guns, cuss words galore, action, and that signature Eddie Murphy wit, and makes this a fun watch. It was Paramount's biggest opening non-holiday weekend grossing film, surpassing the record that was set by Star Trek V: The Final Frontier. The film did not get the most favourable reviews, and many felt not enough was done to promote the movie or give it more of a plot. It managed a respectable $153.5 million at the box office, but was seen as large as not one of Eddie Murphy's best hits. On the whole, it was a decent outing, but obviously it wasn't as good as the first film. It was an okay watch. Gremlins 2: The New Batch. The Green Terrors are back in this horror comedy sequel to 1984's Gremlins. It continues the story of Bill Peltzer and Mogwai Gizmo. After the death of his owner, Mr. Wing, Gizmo the Mogwai is captured by the scientists of the Splice Life Genetic Engineering Laboratory at Clamp Center, a state-of-the-art skyscraper building in Manhattan, which is owned by eccentric billionaire Daniel Clamp. At the mercy of the chief researcher Dr. Cushing Catheta, Gizmo is rescued by the former owner Billy and his fiancée Kate Beringer, both of whom also work at Splice Life. A mishap causes Gizmo to spawn new Mogwai after water accidentally pours onto his head. These new Mogwai, who become gremlins after midnight, unleashing chaos throughout the high-tech skyscraper. Billy and Kate must now stop the gremlins from escaping the building and spreading into the city, facing a new enhanced batch of monsters created by the lab's eccentric scientist. The movie features animated segments from Looney Tunes universe, including the characters Bugs Bunny, Daffy Duck, and Porky Pig. It was written and directed by legendary American animator and voiceover artist Chuck Jones. The film received less than favourable reviews. The ever-present film critic Roger Ebert, who had approved of the first film, stated that Gremlins 2 was meant to satirize sequels. Nevertheless, it did not manage to differentiate itself from the original enough and was not as good. Audiences polled by CinemaScore gave the film an overall grade of a B+. A sequel that has its audience, but was never going to quite capture the appeal of the first film. Robocop 2. Peter Weller returns for his second outing as the big half-man, half-machine Robocop. Robocop 2 came shooting its way onto cinema screens in a highly entertaining and explosive sequel. Set in a dystopian Detroit, the film follows Robocop as he has become embroiled in a scheme made by Omni Consumer Products to bankrupt and take over the city, whilst also fighting the spread of a street drug and its gang of dealers led by the villainous Kane. Kane and his gang ambush Robocop and rip him to pieces before getting dumped right back at the police precinct. He is put together, however, he has been reprogrammed with more than 300 new directives that severely impede his ability to perform his duties. Eventually, Robocop shocks himself with a high-voltage transformer that reboots his system and he functions normally once again. He rallies the police and he goes after Kane. Kane ends up wounded in a fight against Robocop and ends up having his brain implanted into a heavily armed robotic body and is subsequently called Robocop 2 and goes on a killing spree. At an unveiling ceremony for Robocop 2 in Delta City, Robocop 2 goes out of control and berserk when the OCP chairman holds up a canister of nuke. Robocop arrives along with the police, and it's a fight to the finish between the two machines, with Robocop eventually coming out on top after ripping the Robocop 2's brain and smashing it to pieces, defeating Kane and Robocop 2 in the process. The film received mixed reviews, with the common complaint being that the character development of Robocop was buried under a sea of violence. Janet Maslin of the New York Times wrote, "Unlike Robocop, a clever and original science fiction film with a genuinely tragic version of its central character, Robocop 2 doesn't bother to do anything new. The film managed to gross over $45 million worldwide, and it was not one of the higher earners in 1990. If you wanted character growth and an in-depth story, this movie wasn't it. If you wanted high-octane action and violence, Robocop 2 served up well in this department. Ghost Dad. Bill Cosby stars in this fantasy comedy directed by the legendary Sidney Poitier. Cosby plays widowed single dad Elliot Harper, whose sole focus is his family's financial well-being, spending all his time working to secure a crucial business deal that would put his accounts in the black. Unfortunately, the consequence of all this hard work is he is neglecting his 3 kids as they all pine for his attention. Things take a drastic turn for the worse when Elliot is involved in a fatal car crash. He amazingly survives, but unbeknownst to him at first, he is now a ghost. This leads to all sorts of hijinks involving his kids, as they can only see him in a completely dark room. Elliot is later whisked away to London by paranormal researcher Sir Edith Moser, who tells him he is a ghost who has yet to enter the afterlife because they screwed up. His soul will not cross over until the Thursday. During that time, Elliot must clinch the deal as a ghost from the afterlife to secure his children's future. Edith later reveals to Elliot that he is not dead, but his spirit jumped out of his body in fright and he needs to go back into his body to rejoin the land of the living. Upon discovering this, the family attempt to help Elliot to reconnect with his body, but his eldest Diane slips on some skates on the stairs and winds up in the hospital as well. She also ends up as a ghost, just like her dad. Elliot begins to flicker as time is running out and pleads with Diane to return to her body. Elliot finally wakes up after returning to his body, and Diane does the same, and the family are happily reunited. The film was critically panned by several media critics, and at a box office gross of just $25.4 million on a $30 million budget, commercially it was a flop. But over time it found its following, and whilst it was not an all-time classic, it can be looked upon as a movie with funny and heartwarming scenes. Originally, Steve Martin was to play the role of Elliot, with John Badham of Saturday Night Fever to direct. Both ended up not being part of the film for unknown reasons, and Bill Cosby took the lead role and Sidney Poitier directed. This movie came amongst the time period when The Cosby Show was at its apex in terms of popularity. Not an all-time classic by any means, but an endearing family movie to enjoy. The Krays. A 1990 British biographical crime drama film. It is based on the lives and crimes of the real-life British gangster twins Ronald and Reginald, the Krays. The twins are played by real-life brothers Gary and Martin Kemp from the 80s group Spandau Ballet. The film navigates the lives of the Krays from childhood to adulthood. The plot is mainly focused on the relationship between the twins and their mother. Ronnie is the dominant and psychotic twin with a penchant for violence and a paranoid schizophrenic. His actions influences his brother Reginald, and the two go on to commit several acts of violence as they rise to power as the leaders of a powerful organised gang in 1960s London. But at the height of their power, the brothers veer into different lives, giving the older crime bosses a chance to reclaim what the Kray twins took from them. The film was reviewed positively by critics, with Rotten Tomatoes giving the film an 82% score, and the film went on to gross an eventual box office total of $9 million. Rocky V. Sly Stallone returns as Rocky Balboa for the 5th installment of the Rocky franchise, which he wrote the screenplay for. Balboa is now retired, but has fallen on hard times after his accountant has embezzled all of his money on real estate deals that went sour and failed to pay Rocky's taxes over the previous 6 years, which leaves him bankrupt. His home and his belongings are sold to pay the debt, and along with his wife Adrian, they move back to their old working-class neighborhood in Philadelphia. There he begins to mentor a young but fiery young boxer named Tommy, and helps him rise up the ranks to become a top contender. At the same time, Rocky is trying to mend his shaky relationship with his own son Robert. Boxing promoter George Washington Duke entices Tommy with luxuries and promises joining him is the only path to winning their heavyweight belt. Tommy leaves Rocky after being told dealing with Washington. Predator 2. Lethal Weapon star Danny Glover stars in Predator 2, the sequel to the Schwarzenegger original. The film is set 10 years after the first movie, and Glover plays a disgruntled cop who is investigating a war between rival drug cartels, whilst also trying to stay alive against the Predator, who is on a hunting spree, with Glover looking to get revenge for a murdered colleague. The reviews for this were mostly negative on several movie sites, and given the lack of Schwarzenegger, it was always going to be a tough film to act. Danny Glover did get praise for his performances in the movie, and overall, it's an okay watch. 3 Men and a Little Lady. starring Tom Selleck, Ted Danson, and Steve Guttenberg, the sequel to 1987's Three Men and a Baby. Mary is now 5 years old and lives with the three lads and her mother, Sylvia. Peter, who is played by Tom Selleck, falls in love with Sylvia, and she feels the same way, but Peter, being a guy, doesn't express his feelings. Sylvia wants more and accepts the proposal of a director named Edward, who is not enamored with young Mary and the plan to move to England. Peter has to pluck up the courage to reveal his feelings whilst exposing Edward as a phony. Whilst this was not as good as Three Men and a Baby, the film is a decent sequel with plenty of charm and humour. The Rookie. Clint Eastwood and Charlie Sheen star in this action body cop thriller. Eastwood plays veteran police detective Nick Polowski, who teams up with younger detective David Ackerman, played by Sheen. Together, their intent is to take down a German crime lord in downtown Los Angeles, following months of investigation into an exotic car theft ring. Polowski isn't so happy when he gets paired with Ackerman. Most of Polowski's partners have ended up in a body bag, and he believes the same will end up for Ackerman. But they have to get along if they want to take down their car theft ring, whose leaders are responsible for the death of the veteran's last partner. The leaders are played by Raul Julia, Sonia Braga, and this was Eastwood's second film directed this year after he did White Hunter, Black Heart. Edward Scissorhands. Fresh from the successes of Beetlejuice and Batman '89, famed director Tim Burton directed this gothic romantic fantasy film. It tells the story of a scientist played by Vincent Price, who built an animated human being, the gentle Edward, played by Johnny Depp. The scientist dies before he can finish assembling Edward though, leaving the young man with a freakish appearance, punctuated by the scissor blades he has instead of hands. Loving suburban saleswoman Peg, played by Diane West, discovers Edward and takes him home, where he falls for Peg's teen daughter Kim, played by Winona Ryder. However, despite his kindness and artistic talent, Edward's hands make him an outcast, especially to religious fanatic Esmeralda and Kim's boyfriend Jim, who tries to take advantage of his naivete. After creating an ice sculpture, the ice shavings are thrown into the air and it starts to snow. Kim dances in the snowfall, but Jim arrives suddenly, calling out to Edward, surprising him and causing him to accidentally cut Kim's hand. Jim accuses Edward of intentionally harming her, but Kim, fed up with Jim's jealous behavior, breaks up with him. Further down the movie, Jim gets a hold of a gun and shoots at Edward before grabbing a fire poker and beating him. Edward refuses to fight back until he sees Kim hit by Jim as she tried to intervene. Enraged, Edward stabs Jim in the stomach and pushes him from a window of the mansion to his death. Kim confesses her love to Edward and kisses him, but accepts that their love can never be truly fulfilled. On a budget of $20 million, the film grossed over $86 million. That's over 4 times its budget. Critics gave it very positive reviews, with Rotten Tomatoes averaging a rating of 7.7 out of 10, stating the first collaboration between Johnny Depp and Tim Burton. Edward Scissorhands is a magic modern fairy tale with gothic overtones and a sweet center. Johnny Depp's portrayal of Edward Scissorhands is one of his most memorable roles in his career, and the movie is a quintessential 1990s classic.